Check. All right. I don't know how many people we actually have here today. I don't think we're having that many, but I'm assuming that people will catch back up with this when um, they want to. So once again, I'm just kind of don't mind me. I'm working things here to make sure everything's set up the way it's supposed to be. Looking all right here. Let me make sure I got my stream up. All right. I think we should be okay. Yep. All right. So um, feel free to let me know in the chat. If you can't hear something or if the audio is no good, my expectations are it should be fine, but you never can really tell. I'm going to actually mute this. Excuse me. I'm sorry. I don't want anybody to hear any feedback on my end, but the microphone should be working fine, so we should be okay. All right. So, for those of you that were here today, we talked a bit about the Egyptian mythology as sort of a corollary to the Greek mythology, as these roles that myth will take, as the way in which culture is collected, disseminated, and articulated from one generation to the next within a particular society. I'm just going to push this back a bit. It's like way in my face. Now, I want to actually transition away from myth and actually get into some more actual history. And since we talk about history, let's talk about what we mean by history. So I do, or I explain this in what I call big H and little h history, okay? So you understand what the course actually is. So for me, big H history is when you're doing the science, the specific social science, a lot of S's there, sorry, of history. History is a science. Most of the disciplines within the social studies are actually not studies at all, they're sciences. What's the difference? A science will typically have a specific set of parameters, guidelines, vocabulary, and methodologies for achieving its particular stated goal, the thing it's trying to study. When you take a scientific approach, we have a definition, it's right here on the slide for you. We have a definition of what that means. So when I say that history is a science, what is it doing? Well, first off, history is the study of the historiographical record of humans, which is to say writing. So the written record of humanity is history. So when you say prehistory, you're saying before humans invented writing. Now, the reason why that's important is because it does seem to imply that if there's not writing involved in something, it is not for the historian's domain. In other words, if I'm looking at a cave painting, is that history? Well, there's no writing. There's no written language. There's a cave painting. Is that history? Is it art history, perhaps? Well, it's not history because it's not writing. If you're taking a narrow view that history is only the science of the thing it studies, which is to say, it's only the writing. Very, very rarely have I seen history focus solely on writing. Certainly, if you were to do history courses in a college, something like that, I can tell you most of what you study is going to be the written record of humankind in the form of primary or secondary sources. When it comes to what I call little h history, this is the history we tend to actually utilize, use, and frankly, what you're learning here. Little h history takes the science of big H history, but applies it to adjacent elements of academic disciplines that are useful for getting at the biggest picture, the broadest picture, the most accurate picture we can possibly paint about a particular group, society, whatever it might be. So I'll give you some sense of that as well. So let's take that cave painting. Let's say we take that cave painting as a form of archaeology. It is an artifact left behind by human manufacture, right? They manufactured dyes and paints or whatever and scribbled on a wall with these paintings, and these paintings, not words, but objects, animals, images, these things are part of that prehistoric record. A historian who's studying all of history would want the context of these other elements. They'd want to look at the cultural anthropology, the economics, the sociology, the archaeology we mentioned before, the political science of these various different societies and not just rely on the written element of them. So basically, the lineage historian is taking all of these departments, all of these disciplines, bringing them together and making some sense of them in a greater whole or picture. So it's much less narrow focus, which is probably good because when you focus very narrowly on something, you can get a very good sort of detailed view of it, but you're also running the risk of not being able to get a clear picture of the wider element. So it's one of those, do you see the forest or do you see the trees? You want to be in a position to see both, right? You want to be able to see, here is the individual trees, but you need to be able to see how they live in the context of the forest. You know, if I zoom in on two trees in your backyard and all I see are these two trees, I don't know if I'm in a forest or if I'm in your backyard. So, but the trees themselves are necessary as individual items of study. So we want to do both. Now, the best way we do that is with the scientific process. Now, this was invented by Francis Bacon in the end of the 1500s, more or less. And what I want to discuss about his work is how it affects other things we've done. So as an example, you should have seen this in science classes long before now. It should be a staple of any lab you do, is the scientific process. Now, I'm putting different words on this than you might have seen in the science class, but this is a step-by-step process by which you can examine things to most likely be able to determine what is more like to be a fact and what is more like to be not a fact. So we'll start with the scientific process itself, and that is characterization. You define the question, right? So what is the issue that you want to explore? All right. So let's do one here. We'll have a little fun with this. I don't think I did this over the summer, so I'm going to do it now. If you heard the joke, that's okay. We'll carry on anyway. Let's say I observe every morning when I wake up, I have to use the bathroom. I want to know what causes that. There's my question. I define the question. What causes me to have to pee when I get up in the morning? Okay. So now I'm going to explore preliminary information. What are the things that are, sorry, my ties are off. What are the things that are obvious from sights, from sounds, from experience, from feelings, from observation? What are the things I can just tell instantly are realities about this? Not necessarily the answer, right? We're not there yet, but just realities of observation. So, for example, I may notice that, well, I do pee at other times of the day, so it's not just the morning. That's an observation. But it's routinely and consistently the morning. It's the most consistent time of day when that happens. That's an observation. I may observe things like it happens whether I'm home or sleeping in a hotel or on vacation or whatever. These are just preliminary observations, things I want to think about. I also didn't think about what else is true about this time. So if the location where it happens, whether I'm home or not, doesn't matter. What about the morning is also going on? Is it related to, I don't know, laying in bed all night? Does the bed somehow create this need? Is there something going on with the air in the house? Well, no, because again, it happens in multiple places. And we look at these different ideas to sort of understand where are we going to find this one particular, how can we boil down the cause here? And we start to make conjecture. And conjecture is a hypothetical answer. And let's say in this particular case, the hypothetical answer I arrive at is one that's a little bit silly, but does fit the facts. And the hypothetical answer might be something like the rising sun happens in the morning. So early in the morning, the sun rises. Does the sun rising over the horizon, rising into the sky, does that because it correlates with my need to use the bathroom? Is the sun causing me to pee? Is the rising sun in the morning somehow triggering my body into a reaction to go have to use the bathroom? And on the surface, on the face, you might go, this is ridiculous. But on the other hand, it is a hypothesis, right? It's conjecture. I am conjuring up a possible answer based on the available evidence I have. Notice I didn't say that unicorns farting fairy dust is the reason I had to use the bathroom, because I have no evidence of a unicorn fairy dust farting or anything like it. I do have evidence that is accurate, that the sun rises in the morning, and I have to use the bathroom in the morning. Does the sun contribute to that need? explore, right? Go find out. So that would be the idea of conjecture there. Now, we then predict, right? We predict what will happen as we try to do experimentation to prove or disprove the claim. So in this case, if I say, all right, how could I go about trying to predict whether or not the sun is at fault here? I could interview other people. I could put myself in a situation where the room is totally blacked out. It's dark. I have no way of noticing whether or not the sun is up or down. I could try to sleep at different times of day, wake up at night, wake up in the middle of the day, wake up in 1 a.m., 2 a.m., and see if the same need appears at times when the sun's not rising. There could be all sorts of things like this I could do. And these would be me predicting what will happen in each of these little scenarios. Like as I explore this conjecture, will this happen? As I explore that conjecture, will this happen? And hopefully I'm building a framework where overlapping realities are creating truth. Now, experiment would be doing these experiments. Actually saying, okay, I'm going to stay up all night. I'm not sleeping. And when the sun comes up, will I have the need to use the bathroom? Let's find out. And do that and run that test several times. And do other tests and other tests. And eventually you come up to the idea that actually has nothing to do with the sun. Our evidence doesn't point to that. Let's find us a new answer. So that would be the scientific process. And what's good about it is it forces us as individuals, as learners, as scientists, as whatever, to accept that we're going to go where the facts take us. We're going to go where the facts lead. And if I want or enjoy the idea of having that that original hypothesis of the sun being the cause for me to urinate, if that's something I like the idea of because I think it's interesting, it's fun, it's cool, I want that to be the right answer. If I'm a scientist, I don't sit there and go, well, I want that to be the right answer, therefore I'm going to go out of my way to prove it to be the right answer. That's not science. I don't want to prove my case true. I want to go where the evidence points me. If the evidence happens to point my case to be true, then I have a good eye for collecting evidence and noticing problems. If it doesn't, then I don't. So that's the big H versus little h history and the scientific process. All right, this place here, this is an open field with a bunch of sheep on it. And let's talk about early, sorry. Apologies, I've been teaching all day. I'm completely out of coffee. All right, I had like a coffee vapors left there. And I am getting tired. So if I stand, it's probably going to be because I want to make sure the blood keeps flowing and my brain doesn't shut off. All right, I'm going to check the chat while we're here, and nothing's good. Okay. There are two basic modes. Oh, my fat head's in the way. Huh? Hold on, let me move this. Yoink. And let me get rid of this frame. Do I move camera frame? Yes, I do. All right, there we go. There are two major ways societies can, what's the word I want to use? Societies can acquire calories. Now, why do we need calories? The essential core element of any society for it to survive is to fend off starvation. Starvation, dehydration, right? You need water, you need food. That's it. Simple as that. Nothing else is more important than that. If you don't do these things, if they're not well maintained, if they're not well handled, societies are going to die and die horribly. So, this means that whatever a community does, its caloric input, the amount of calories it's bringing into the community, must exceed its caloric output or it will not survive. That's just true. Now, this does lead to weird circumstances where human beings will have to come up with new methods or maybe alternate methods or maybe mixed methods to acquire maximized calories. But to acquire a calorie requires the expenditure of a calorie, right? So for me to get calories from one thing, I have to be spending calories from something else. So if I don't know, if I want to hunt a deer, there's certainly a lot of calories to be had in the successful hunt of a deer, but I have to expend calories to get the deer. Is that a worthwhile trade, or should I simply be agrarian, grow grain, and be happy? I think it's gonna be tough. I think it's a tough question to ask, but it is definitely true that these early nomads or these early peoples would typically drift towards nomadic style culture where they have a herd of animals and they're herding those animals back and forth and back to various places. That's absolutely true. So that's part one, or step one at the very least. Now, step two. Oh, wrong thing. Sorry. There we go. Step two is looking at what the advantage or disadvantages of hunter gathering versus pastoralists, or those who are farmers. So, for one, hunter gatherer lifestyles are very, very inefficient. For it to work, your society must be out and about actively spending calories. And so I'm going to be most people actively spending calories. And then once the calories come home, you feed, you know, well, once the calories are brought back in, you now have to use, um, you have to, once you've collected calories in the form of meat, foods, whatever, you have to spend more calories in order to process that thing. So in the case of something like flour, if I bring back flour, whether it's wild wheat or whatever, and I turn it into flour, I grind down the flour, that's going to take time to process. And if it doesn't, get used quickly, it's going to go bad. So this is the idea of I am very reliant on surrounding bounty for easily accessible calories. And nomadic hunters don't want to get involved typically in some massive, we're going to hunt the giant creature thing. That's not really often going to be very wise because, again, it is the ancient world. You could be harmed, right? You could be harmed. You could harm somebody else, they can harm you. This is a very unstable way of living. If I need a particular area because it's got a well and you want a particular area that I already have because it has a well, we're going to fight. That's going to be a problem. In addition, hunting and gathering, especially the hunting portion, if you come anywhere near dangerous animals, there's a real chance that the animal gets you. You might get it eventually, but it's probably going to get you. So you want to think about those kind of things because animals will do that. So there's this risk reward, right? And then even once you have all that sorted out, what do you do when people get injured? What do you do when people get old? What do you do when people are too young to be useful? What do you do with women that are breastfeeding? What do you do with pregnant women? What do you do? What do you do? What do you do? There's always a million carve outs for why some people should not be involved in something and other people should. On the other side of things, you have the pastoralists or the agrarians. Now, they're doing a couple different things, not all of which are better. One, they are domesticating animals. This is good and this is bad. On the one hand, the domestication of animals can be quite bad because, for example, chicken are stuck in a, maybe in the modern world, chicken is an example. You gather them up, you stick them into some sort of a warehousing situation where their only job is to sit there and lay eggs. Well, is that really the best way to get the best eggs? Are those going to make for the most healthy eggs? Is the chicken going to be as stress-free as possible when it's doing that? Probably not. In addition, pastoralists are going to become territorial as well, just like the hunter-gatherers would. They often would avoid trying to do it as often because there's a huge risk in a conflict, right? I may win, but I may lose. And if I lose, we're over. So I got to be careful about that. And many hunter-gatherer societies end up being pastoralists, which again is another version of this gatherer society. They end up being pastoralists because over time, the pastoral way of life simply yields better outcome than the traditional sort of the pastoral way of life will yield better outcomes than traditional hunter gathering because you're herding your flock and moving it from area to area, location to location, which is a very different thing than trying to hunt down animals. All right, next. Okay. This is a image. It's an artist image. Obviously, it's a drawing. It's not real. Sorry. Of a early agrarian structure known as Katul Hayuk. Now, Katul Hayuk is the earliest, I think, although I heard recently it might have been an earlier settlement dug up nearby, but as far as I'm aware, it's the earliest full settlement we have exposed to the open air. It's a group of people living together in an agrarian lifestyle. And I want to spend some time looking at the picture in a minute because there's a lot of interesting stuff in there. But let's focus on the left-hand side on these bullets. First off, why settle in the first place? Why ever become an agrarian? If the other thing is working, if the hunter-gatherer thing is working, or the pastoralists are working, great. Why would you ever, I don't know why you would ever do this, right? Why would you ever want to move into a place like this? And the real answer right off the bat is going to be security. This is both in the form of food, in terms of food security, and then defense or defense security. You want to be able to say, hey, guess what? Um, our adjoined buildings, you can see it to yourself in the picture, our adjoined buildings are effectively one block, and that is a block of people who are going to defend our property from outsiders. Now, again, when I mean joined, I mean they are joined. So if you look carefully, they're walls of one end of the wall of another. Anything that might be considered the extreme of the exterior of the city. So it does, in fact, make for a great little opportunity for people to a great opportunity for people who want to demonstrate in some way, shape, or form just how effective this particular society could be at resisting some of these things. Because if an enemy comes for you, you have a natural barrier, a natural wall. That's already a challenge because the enemy's not bringing a wall with them, right? So there's already a challenge for the enemy to try to storm the castle. In addition, you may notice all the doors are on the roofs. There are no doors at ground level. Doors at ground level would simply provide entrance points to foreigners, so they don't want to do that. And then this is the rapid fire of how it goes. Now, there's some bad things too. For one, well, the biggest good thing is you'll get the largest food supply doing this. Agrarians produce way, way, way more food than nomads ever could. That's a huge bonus. When it comes to challenges, disease is big. You're living in cramped quarters with a bunch of people you don't know. The odds that somebody here gets sick are pretty much guaranteed. Hopefully not hopefully not too many. The crops you're reliant upon, which you are growing and using river water to maintain. What if the river floods? What if the river doesn't flood quite enough? What if there aren't as many supplemental rains as though there be? Now what do you do? So natural disasters like rivers, floods, long coasts, droughts, etc. What else we got? What else do we got? One second. Okay. I have a lot of slides in here. I forgot. A lot of repeats too. Oh, I'm going the wrong way. Okay, sorry. So, if there's a river, if there are locusts, if there's a drought, unlike in the case of nomads, you're stuck here. You're stuck here. You're not going anywhere. So you're going to have to go and get food somehow. And that might literally mean marching over the hill and go fighting the society over there to take their stuff. Because your choice is you starve or they starve. I don't know anybody who's going to make the choice of you starve. They're pretty much going to be guaranteed to make the choice that somebody else has to starve. That's pretty much what happens. All right. Social class structures. We're going to talk about that in a second. Let's do a 3-minute break. I just want to fill up my water. Be right back, and then we'll carry on with the second half of this lecture for AP World. Back in a minute. Okay, we're back. I found a bottle of water lying around in the classroom. Somebody has, who knows, it could be there all summer, but I'm taking it. And I'm making tea out of it. So if you hear bubbling, that's the tea getting hot. And we're going to hope for the best here. We're going to have some terrible tea. It's going to taste like coffee, but right now I'm desperate. Have nothing to drink for hours, so we're going for it. All right, hot water. Smells a little funky. That's okay. Let's do it. Boop. All right, one more. Hold on. I want to fish out whatever that is in there. I don't know what it is. I think it's just a piece of coffee. It's a coffee grind. Okay. This is going to be the best tea ever. Okay. Cool. We're back. All right, now let me go back here. I skipped the slide accidentally. Let's go back. Yeah. So now here's another part of agrarian society. So let me kind of recap because I just walked away from the computer for a second. So early agrarians have a couple of major advantages. The first one is for sure food surplus. The goal of any society working on this calorie problem, which is every society when they begin, is to get a food surplus. It's very, very difficult to get a food surplus as a nomad because nomads, whether they're pastoralists or otherwise, remember, pastoralists are nomads, right? Whether they're nomads or otherwise, pastoralists, let's go back to this. Actually, let's go back one more time. Sorry. So pastoralists are people who domesticate animals, right? This is what they do, and they use those as the basis of societies, right? This is what they kind of do. Where, in other words, so imagine like a horse culture that rides around horses and they do things that way. And the animals become the real focus. They don't hunt or gather that much. They're mostly using the animals as their main source of food. They don't really engage in any agricultural stuff at all. They often are territorial because they need grazing ground. So imagine a society that just uses sheep, uses cows. Cows are good. The sheep are a good example. They move their sheep from one place to another, their goats from one place to another, let them graze, and then consume the products of the goats to become pastoralists or herders. Okay. So these are your nomads, whereas the agrarians aren't doing all that. Now you notice they have livestock here, they have domesticated animals here. So they do have flocks and herds and things like that, but they stay in one place. And the reason they do that is because they're using the ability to farm as a way to generate a massive food surplus, much, much, much larger than anything they would normally be able to generate um, on their own if they weren't, actually doing farming. Farming is a high surplus situation. Now, the way you get there is through carbohydrates. So, farming cultures will always focus on the creation of a singular, usually singular, carbohydrate that is the core element, the core basis of their entire diet. So, in the case of Middle Eastern cultures, like those around the Tigris Euphrates and the Nile, you're going to have wheat, right? Wheat is the big one. In the New World, in the agrarian society, New World, in Mesoamerica, agrarian societies will use maize or corn. Eastern societies will often use rice. These are all core carbohydrates. And the reason carbohydrates are so important is because calories per carb is a very good equation if your goal is to stave off starvation, right? Now, it's really weird, right? Because in the modern world, we often are told and taught that you really don't want to eat too many carbs. It's not very healthy for you. Yeah, because you're not in a state of starvation. If you're in a state of societal starvation, then yeah, you're gonna want to use carbs because carbs are very, very good at delivering a whole lot of calories in a very small little package. I mean, go look at a loaf of bread. How many calories are in a loaf of bread? A lot. If you eat the whole loaf, it's a lot of calories. Even healthy, normal, baked bread is going to create a lot of calories, dense calories, in a package this big. You have to hunt it, you have to raise it, you have to feed it, you have to do anything like that. I guess you have to raise the crop, sure, but these things are not dangerous. They're not fighting back. Um, and so, and you can repeat it over and over and over in roughly the same area. You might have to move one field to another spot or something like that, or switch your crops out. But in general, this works very, very well, and this creates the food surplus. It's also great for defense. As I said, this is one continuous wall of these different houses connected to each other. And these houses would create, a defensive perimeter for this society to function should somebody come over the hill to try and steal your stuff or kill everybody. And then lastly, though, there are challenges, and they are what we said: diseases. What if there's a flood? What if locusts eat all your crops? What if there isn't enough water? What if there's some sort of a blight, a plant disease that wipes out your crops? Now what? Now what do? Well, now you go over the hill, find the other agrarian society, and take their stuff. Like this, is what's going to have to happen. It's just the way it is. No one's going to willingly starve. So agrarianism, agricultural um, lifeways, definitely become the primary methodology for these societies. There's no doubt about it. It becomes the primary methodology for all of humankind. That does not mean it replaces nomadic life. I would say it's fair to say, hold on, that the hunter-gatherer lifestyle does indeed eventually largely vanish. It's a very, very, very inefficient lifestyle that cannot support a large community at all. Whereas pastoralism, the herders of domestic animals who still move, but rather than seeking food, you seek grazing lands for your creatures, your animals, to eat at, and then you eat off the animals. This is a much more longer lived tradition of nomadic life and still happens in some places even today and will happen concurrently with the large states that are agrarian around them. They will typically be smaller places and smaller populations, as you'll see, that may not necessarily matter in some cases, but there will be kind of a weird sort of on again, off again friendship and conflict between settled peoples and nomadic peoples on various ends. The nomads suffer from not having the ability to craft specific or highly technical tools while having to stay on the move. You know, being a metallurgist for a nomadic society would be quite difficult. Being a blacksmith for a nomadic society would be quite difficult. But if I'm a nomadic society and I could trade things I have with the local agrarians and get from them the things that they make that I don't, and they get from me the things I make that they don't, this would be a beneficial trade for everybody. And that is a definition of sort of a bit of how these agrarians and these nomads do interact in times of peace and plenty. But make no mistake, nomads will attack you if you're weak, if you're inefficient, if it looks like they could take you over, they will attack you, and very often become, as a result, no longer nomads themselves when they conquer your territory. Don't mind me, I'm just checking something here. I got a message that doesn't matter at all. All right, let's keep moving. So, another thing that happens is typically agrarian societies are far more rigid in their social structures. So they're going to put far more effort into establishing who's on top, who's in the middle, who's not. You need that organization, right? Any group of people who are going to be doing something in the same place for an extended period of time needs some level of organization. You can't just say, all right, everybody, do what you want and let me know how it turns out. You will get chaos and you won't get much results. You're going to have somebody in there organizing it. So, make no mistake, the people at the top of the pyramid are going to maintain the power. The people at the bottom of the pyramids are going to have little to no power. And I'm just showing you three different social class pyramids from three different river valley civilizations. These are not all encompassing. They're not the last part of the story in any case. It's just showing you how these things tend to work. I don't really like the pyramid thing anyway because it kind of, I think, it gives impressions that aren't true about the size and scope of some of the populations compared to other parts of the populations. But regardless, the general idea of it remains more or less true. You have a social system. It often is rigid. They're not simply going to let you move from, let's just say, farmer to merchant. It's often not an option. Either you're born into these things, or you're assigned these things, or some circumstance of your life allows you to fit within one or the other, and you tend to stay. Often there's not a lot of social mobility, and the reason there isn't a lot of social mobility is because society needs you to not be mobile. And I don't mean move around. I mean, if you're a farmer, I really don't need my farming population halfway through farming decide they'd rather be soldiers. Now, I will sometimes recruit them as soldiers, but often I will simply send my own aristocrats out to fight the other groups of aristocrats, and we leave the laborers back at home. The laborers aren't trained to fight. They're not well nourished. They're often sickly and weak, and as a result, likely to die anyway. And then if they start dying, how am I going to have my crops harvested by people who aren't me? So this is often a lot of good reasons why they don't just do a thing. Okay, now I'm just skipping ahead to see where we're going here. All right. All right, so we'll start the Fertile Crescent, I guess, just to talk a little bit about it, and then I do want to move into Mesopotamia and away from Egypt because we talked about Egypt, we talked about Greece. Mesopotamia is another big one. The Mesopotamians, or Mesopotamia, the land between the rivers, okay, is in a thing called the Fertile Crescent. The Fertile Crescent, and actually, I think this map might be wrong. So the Fertile Crescent's actual landmass, in terms of its shoreline against the Eastern Mediterranean, would have been different in ancient days, but whatever. For now, it's fine. Mesopotamia is the first site of human agrarian civilizations that we know of, and these groups of people created what we call city-states, effectively large cities of agrarian peoples who establish control over a region and effectively do that. Other cities might do something different, but that's what these guys do. In other words, other cultures may be something different, but these guys form these city states. City states make sense in the ancient world. There isn't a lot of power, really. There's no professional armies. So, how do you maintain a territory beyond what your borders of your wall can maintain? So, probably what you have is your city and the surrounding countryside that are fields, and there's probably a pretty nebulous line where your stuff ends and the next guy's stuff begins. But there will become what's called established territory, where you know and I know that I rule from here to there, and you know that I know you know I rule from here to there. So don't cross that line, or there's going to be trouble. That does happen quite often. All right. Now let's go about the Epic of Gilgamesh for a minute. See, it's terrible. Oh God. Oh, I deserve it. Okay. The Epic of Gilgamesh is the oldest story that we have that's written down. And we don't even have all of it. We have parts of it that existed on cuneiform tablets. So the ancient Mesopotamians invented cuneiform. Cuneiform is a form of writing, and the stories of the Epic of Gilgamesh was written on those cuneiform tablets, and there's quite a few of them. At least the ones we have, there are a few of them. We don't have all the pieces of the story, but we have a lot of it. And so let me kind of give you a bit of a sense of what's going on here, because this is a good one here. This is a visual image of Gilgamesh, who's the guy on the right, the naked guy on the right, fighting against, is that Hamamu? What is his name again? Hold on, I want to look it up. Gilgamesh versus Enkidu. Wrong guy. Gilgamesh versus Enkidu. Now, Enkidu is an interesting situation. Make sure I have the right guy here. I think I do. Yes. I think. No, I'm thinking of a different fight. Um. Anyway, figure it out. Sorry. But let me tell you a bit about the story here. So Gilgamesh is a Mesopotamian king, and he observes death. And I forget the detail as to what part of it, who died or whatever, but he observes death. I want to say it could be a relative, a father, whoever. And he becomes obsessed with the idea that he did not want to die. He wanted to find the secret of eternal life. So, what was the secret of eternal life? Well, he didn't know. So he went on a great journey to try and find it. Um, Throughout that journey, he's discovering a lot of things, and it's an interesting tale because it ends in kind of a bittersweet note. But one of the things he does is he's forced to challenge these creatures outside the city. In particular, one is a man who's wild and living among the animals. All right, he's like a savage living among the animals. He's actually living among them, the wolves and other creatures outside the realms of the city. So this particular man, this wild beast, is a threat to the city, And so the city in this case would like to see this beast, this man beast, curbed in some way, stopped before he gets, you know, before he causes any more damage, danger, hurts anyone else, kills anyone else, whatever. So Gilgamesh goes out to challenge him. And Gilgamesh is trying to lure him away from um, his wild animal brethren. And he's unable to do this at first. And then later, he comes up with a plan for this. And the plan he comes up with is to bring with him a priestess. Now, by priestess, what we're referring to here is a woman of the city. And it's possible the word priestess might have even have been like a bit of a substitute for the concept of a prostitute, but regardless, this priestess is brought to this wild man in the woods and is displayed naked to him. Now, what this does is it actually sort of enchants this wild man who's never seen this before, and rather than stay with his wild brethren animals, he decides to go, because these were actual animals, he decides to go and sort of follow the naked woman. And this is an analogy for marriage, really. It's an analogy for the idea that the role of marriage is for a woman to civilize what would otherwise be a savage creature who has great potential but can't channel it in a wise way. So again, I come back to what we talked about in class today with Osiris and Isis. It's a very similar dynamic where it's not a case of the man is simply in charge and the woman is simply a servant. That is a very weird read, and you don't find that in the ancient texts really anywhere. What you find instead is this idea of the essentialness of the couple as a distinct set of abilities used to create a whole. And the woman is able to civilize this man and turn this wild creature and turn him into something useful going forward from there. And Gilgamesh, again, had wrestled the thing and tried to stop him that way. This was eventually how he ended up securing stopping the problem in effect. But Gilgamesh ultimately fails in this quest. He discovers, as he goes through journeys and sees other death and gets into other adventures, he eventually discovers that, in fact, there is no secret to immortality. It doesn't exist. And the moral of the story is life ends in death, and that is a reality. And the embracing of that reality is the struggle of life, right? The struggle of life is to embrace the reality that at some point it will end, often unceremoniously, often without dignity, but it will in fact end. And it's both the tragedy and the triumph of the mortal human condition. And Gilgamesh's epics understood this. Again, I come back to the Greeks, where the Greek gods were in many ways sort of envious of the mortality of men. Although they would never trade it, because the Greek gods did not want to die, they enjoyed their immortality, they were also well aware that it meant that some things would never simply be as sweet, because it had no bitterness to counteract it. Again, it's like Superman, right? If there is no failure point, if you can't lose, what value is the victory? If you live a good life, what value is that good life if the life never ends? Because if it never ends, you have always the potential to have a terrible life that just takes on the new phase. Or your good life doesn't mean much because you have an unlimited amount of time to be good. You could be good for spans of aeons if you live forever. Again, that's why these immortality characters are often quite stale, because they don't really have anything to create the necessary friction for dramatic interest. And guys like Superman, or that's why vampire tales often have these ideas of these ancient creatures being bored, just bored, because life has nothing worth valuing since it never will end. Anything you find interesting today, you will eventually find boring eventually. That sort of element of it. Okay. Now, there is some syncretism going on here. We show about the syncretic process generally. Syncretism is the idea that the cultures will share elements with each other that they find useful to plug gaps that exist in their own culture. This is not cultural diffusion. This is more intentional. You could view it as selective borrowing. So, as an example, in ancient China, we'll come across this. The ancient Chinese, even the medieval Chinese, have no native religion. Now, that isn't to say they don't have native spiritual belief systems. They do. But they don't have an organized religious system like a Christianity or an Islam or anything like that. They believe in spirits and they have conceptions of gods and the heavens and so on. And those things are all real and they're all there. But they're not a sort of a worship structure. What they do have is a very strong political tradition. So Taoism, Confucianism, legalism, as we'll discuss, these are political traditions. They're not religious, all right? Especially Taoism, often people think of it as religious. It's not, it's political. So how then do we move from having how does a society address that need for human beings? Often around the world, this need exists for spirituality, for a thing to put faith into, right? What is faith? Faith is this idea that you believe something, even if you don't have evidence to support that belief. Well, humans seem to have a need for this, and also a need to explain things that are beyond the human ability to explain it at the time they're doing it. So again, what happens when you die is a hell of a question. The answer could be nothing. But humans have often come up with these very elaborate explanations what happens when you die. So you'll see cultures like the Chinese incorporate Buddhism, which is an Indian tradition, because Buddhism is something that is going to fit very well in the absence of spirituality in the Chinese mindset. You could be a legalist Buddhist, you could be a Confucian Buddhist, you could be a Taoist Buddhist, although that one gets into a little bit of a struggle. But so does Confucianism and Buddhism. We'll talk about that too. But actually, Confucianism and Buddhism work so well together in some ways that there are later Confucians who simply incorporate chunks of Buddhism into it to create Neo-Confucianism. That's syncretism. That's the purposeful choice to select ideas and incorporate them, because they'll complete in some way gaps in your culture. It's almost like completing gaps in code by borrowing from other things. It's like, oh, I don't know. I'm going to make a video game. All right, what's the game? I'm going to make Super Mario Brothers 75. Okay, cool. What do you want to do? Well, Mario can jump and Mario can run and Mario can punch and throw things and all that. But I want Mario to have a nuclear, a shoulder-launched nuclear weapon. Where can we get that? I don't know. Call of Duty's got something like that. All right, cool, dope. Go get the Call of Duty code for that and put it into this game, and the game will now be complete. And Mario can launch nukes from his shoulder. That is an example of syncretism. It's we have a gap that we want to fill. We have a need to fill the gap. Where's the gap? There it is. What's out there can fill it that we can access? How do we fill it? And, we're not. It's not just gonna be nukes, of course. It'll be mushroom-shaped nuclear bombs because we have to make it ours as well. We don't just carbon copy. We make it ours as well. And you see that in architecture styles, although it's not necessarily the case that these two things are borrowed from each other. These are two adjacent cultures who both developed a pyramid-like structure. Now, the structures have very different purposes, which is why I'm telling you this is not a copy. The pyramids on the left of Egypt are tombs. The ziggurats on the right for Sumeria are temples. These have different purposes, but all the same, the structures have quite large similarities in terms of the dominating idea of a thing that comes to a point towards the sky. And that's not a surprise at all, because the point towards the sky is almost like for example, Egyptian obelisk is actually a good example of syncretism. Egyptian obelisk, if you know what an obelisk is, do I have a picture of an obelisk here? I hope I do. I don't. Okay. If you think of the Washington Monument in Washington, D.C., Google it if you need to. It's a big, long pillar with a tiny pyramid on the top. That's an obelisk. The obelisks were made in Egypt at first, before anybody else copied this architecture piece, to represent the rays of the sun coming down, and often important things were inscribed on them, so it made them holy. So when you see that in Washington, D.C., it's actually a piece of Egyptian architecture brought into Washington, D.C., as a way of representing that sort of that light from the heavens above. That's what it was used for. All right, where are we? I got like a few more minutes for us to switch over to macro. Okay. So when you're an agricultural society, you also have some other opportunities. One of them is going to be, because you're settled and because you have such a food surplus, not everybody needs to be a calorie producer. This is very helpful. You can specialize. And by that I mean, if we develop a system that makes food really well, and instead of having 100% of my people making calories, has to happen in most nomadic societies. 100% of the people are involved in the acquisition of calories in one way or the other. Instead, what I can do is I can have not very small, I can have a small group of my society not make calories. Let's say we have systems in place that allow for 80% of the population, which is not an unreasonable number, to be involved in farming and meet the calorie needs of not just that 80%, but the other 20% who won't be farming. That frees up the other 20% to do other things. So, to ponder mathematics, to ponder science and architecture, agriculture, public works, to be an official priesthood of some religion, to be a political leadership in some capacity, to be a warrior or a soldier or a merchant or you name it, a specialist, an engineer, a mason, a cobbler, an artisan of some kind. All of these things are only possible if you can free up some amount of your humanity to no longer be food producers and instead help them become something else. They're all very, very, very important along these lines. And as societies build upon that, well, then, of course, if I discover something mathematically and you apply that logic to a piece of architecture, we're now doing two things, right? The math is informing the architecture, and the architecture begins to inform what the math, proves the math is right. So if I do a Pythagorean theorem to discover how to best build, I don't know, a support structure or build one of these ziggurats staircases. Now they didn't use it, but let's say they did. If I can figure out mathematically the correct amount of distance on the staircase for that 90-degree angle to ensure that it's all properly maintained, it doesn't collapse under its own weight or tilt over or something like that, I can then utilize that knowledge to help me build more structures in the future of a similar fashion. Just like how the Romans create the arch, and then the Romans create the arch, and then they turn that into the dome by simply repeating arches in a circular fashion. Those are just arches after arches in a circular fashion. So that's just an example of how you can build on these things. So this allows for that level of innovation, where nomadic culture often doesn't have the ability to do that. Because again, you're living off the land, you're constantly on the move. If you're never settled, it's hard to inspire or to invent whole new ideas. You kind of need the time and the ability and the societal freedom to be able to do that in the absence of these other things. All right. These are just examples of architecture in these cities at the time. And you can see that the cultural art of a society can be reflected quite heavily in them. You also see the unplannedness of these cities. Often these cities are not planned. It's settlements grow up organically around sort of like a central area, whether it's a central temple or governmental region of a city. And then around that are these like haphazard built places. Like you can see these streets are kind of oddly shaped. They're misaligned. There isn't a grid structure. You know, um, there isn't public planning for things like optimal traffic flow, sewage, light, air to ensure the greatest airflow to minimize transmission of disease. None of that happens in these places. These things are not planned in that way. They're kind of built up organically and naturally from the people there who build their homes, their structures, their whatever up from a particular area, maybe expand them up, expand them one way, expand them another way, and then this creates sort of the natural maze-like corridors that become early city streets in these times. All right. That's about all I can cover with the time remaining today. Hopefully you found that helpful. I am going to put this on pause right now. And we are at the 1 hour and 1 minute mark. I'm going to put this on pause right now. And then I'm going to just come back to the same stream here and do AP Macro. So if you're an AP Macro student and you arrive at the stream, you're in the right place. Back in a minute. For those of you who are watching World, thank you, and I will see you on Friday. Remember, don't report to school tomorrow to see me, at least. I will see you on Friday. All right, we're back. Okay. Don't mind me. 5 hours of teaching in a row is a thing, and it is not super pleasant. Okay. What I am looking for is the best way to deliver the things I want to deliver to you right now. Let's see. I don't think. Let me look. I do. I do. Okay, good. This will work. Thought I didn't, but I do. Bang. All right, this is a very rough shot version of my normal notes for this thing, but it will definitely do. Let me check the stream to see that it's up and running. 2 people viewing it. I don't know if it's should be fine. Okay. Oh, we have 18 views total. Where are we? It's concurrent. We got boop beep beep bop boop. Okay, this will work. All right. Okay, so today, so we have to kind of go back a little bit today to really to some of what went on today in class to really understand this. So let's go and talk a little bit. And I can see some typos in these notes. Ew, ugly, 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 ugly. I will fix that as we go. All right, this is the basic of economics. Let me do this. This is textbook as textbook gets when it comes to the first steps of economics. This is neither macro nor micro. This is just the way it is. Um, there's some terms here I want us to become comfortable with, or at least accustomed to, because they're going to matter as time goes on, and we're going to use them a lot more. So a couple of warnings up front. Again, this is mostly for benefit of kids who were not here today, because I already said this to those kids. But number one, this course has a strange habit where it'll take terms that mean the exact same thing, and they are exactly the same thing. And they will interchange them and use different ones for different things. Now, why would they do that? Well, you know why they're doing that. They're doing that because, well, maybe you don't know why they're doing that. They're doing that because economics, it turns out, is actually a very difficult medium to test in an AP format. So this is not true of AP World. So if you took AP World or AP US, or I don't know about the other disciplines, I don't really know enough to say, but if you took AP World or AP US, one of the things you'll learn for sure is the idea that AP is actually a pretty good format. The format of the test is pretty good for testing history. It really is. I think it's very, very fair, actually. If you take an AP World exam, I think the multiple choice are complex and difficult, but fair. And I think they do test the skill set. Yeah, they test the skill set they're aiming to test. I do believe that. I do believe the essay is a strong. Oh, this just doesn't work. Don't mind me. I was trying to repair this one. Right. Wait a minute. Maybe it wasn't on. Oh, it's buzzing at me. Oh, it works. Cool. All right. Why is it buzzing at me? Wow. Okay. um, the AP macro doesn't work like that. Like the AP history exams, I think are totally fair. The AP macro, I think, is not fair because the kind of things we test in macro, we learn in macro, are not really well done on multiple choice. And often the multiple choice becomes a bit of a cat and mouse game, and I don't like that. I'll tell you up front, honestly true. My students historically do much better on the part 2 elements of the macro exam, which are not multiple choice, than they do on the multiple choice. And that is something we're working on this year. I'm working on ways to improve that sort of split. But the reality is that multiple choice is, in macro, can be tricky. I think even sometimes unfair in the way it's asked. So that means that one of the things they do to artificially increase difficulty of the multiple choice is to take terms that mean the same thing and swap them in and out. They'll do this all the time. And I have to try to be aware of the fact that I need to teach those terms both at the same time, right? If I'm going to talk about a thing and one term means that thing, another term means that thing, and the third term also means that thing, I need to be using all 3 terms throughout the course and reiterating that. So I just warn you that sometimes I'll be talking about things and I'll say a term and then tell you it also means this, and try to go back and forth. So it might seem a little jumbled. It shouldn't be, but I want to warn you up front that that's a reality. So one word that has no substitute is scarcity. Scarcity is the most important problem in all of the world. There you go. The fundamental reason why. Yes, I think I can say this fairly. The fundamental problem, the fundamental cause of any problem you've ever experienced or will experience is going to be scarcity. At the end of the day, you can boil it down to the reality that resources have a finite limit. Now, all sorts of things are finite. Finite meaning they have a definite limit. And now how you define finality, finiteness, I don't know if finality is the right word. How you define scarcity, I guess that is the right word. Sometimes we'll refer to like scarce over what period of time. Like something might be very scarce in the short term, but might not be scarce in the long term. What does that mean? Okay, lumber. Lumber is a good example. In the short term, I could lop down a huge percentage of trees and run out of trees to lop down. But in the long term, if I'm wise in my business model, even if I'm motivated by nothing other than abject greed, it is in my interest to make sure that I replant trees I cut down. In fact, I should replant more trees that I cut down than trees I'm pulling, right? So if I cut down 10 trees, I should replant 100. Now you say, why would you do that? Well, it's very simple. I want to be able to come back in 10 years and get the other trees or sell the rights for somebody else to come cut down the other trees. If I just cut down the trees, I will one day have no business. So I want to continue to do that. So this is something that is real and happens. And so if you have a system like that, in reality, you don't run out of trees, right? So in the long term, the scarcity is not an issue. In the short term, it absolutely is. So there are wrinkles like that, but in general, scarcity is limited. And if a resource has a finite limit, that means you're going to have a problem because that means you have two issues coming up against each other. The first is these limits. Resources are going to be limited. And we'll talk about what resources are in a minute. Resources are going to be limited. That's it. But there's going to be an unlimited amount of demands, wants, for those resources. And you know this is true because it applies to you just as much as it applies to me. So right now is a good example, okay? Why am I here? Why are you at this computer screen? Whether you're watching this live, and apparently how many of you are, let's find out. Not as many as I'd like. So why are you here? Well, you're here because you in theory want to learn or be exposed to or have some whatever connection to whatever material it is I would have covered tomorrow. Now, this is being filmed Wednesday, 8/26 at 4:11 p.m. The reason this is being filmed at this time is because tomorrow, Thursday, for 8/27, I have as I mentioned in class, a medical emergency is the wrong word, a necessary medical procedure that somebody in my family has to undergo. And it was kind of last minute. It was actually sprung on me Monday night, I guess. And so yesterday morning, I asked the school's leadership, hey, I don't want to give up the ability for students to have this time because they did, in fact, sit there and sign up for this thing. Their parents went out of their way to make sure their children would be available. I would feel bad not being able to fulfill my element of the bargain, which was to give them the instruction they came for. Could we come up with an alternative scheme? Here's the situation on Thursday. It's completely unavoidable, and I'm sorry. There's nothing I can do about it. You know, it is what it is. And they said, okay, I suggested the live stream thing happening today, Wednesday, to make up for that. They said, okay, do it. I said, great. Thank you. I'll do exactly that. So here we are. Why could I not simply do both the medical procedure tomorrow and carry on doing my classes tomorrow? The answer is scarcity. My time, your time, all time is finite. There are 24 hours in the day. I cannot occupy the time from 11 a.m. to 2 p.m., which is where I'm going to be tomorrow, which happens to coincide with all three of the classes I teach here during this week. I cannot occupy that time with both the medical procedure and my responsibilities to teach in class. I can't do that. I can't multitask those two items together. Now, there are other things I can multitask. For example, I was repairing this remote as I was talking to you with my introduction. I was making tea earlier on as I was talking to the AP World students. So I can occupy some time with multiple tasks, often at the cost of the quality with which I'm doing those tasks. But if I have to literally be two places at the same time, one at a medical facility and one here at school, I can't occupy two places at the same time. That is finiteness causing my desire to do both things. I have an unlimited want for that time. And by the way, it is unlimited, truly, because not only do I want to do that, I also want to go home and cook dinner. I also want to go home and take a nap. I also want to go home and see my kids. I also want to go home and play a video game. I also want to go home and paint some miniatures. I also want to go home and get my house decorated for the fall. I also want to go to the store and buy decorations for the fall because I don't really have ones I like too much. I also want to see my uncle. I also want to call my mom. I want to do these all at the same time. Right, I want to occupy. If I could, you ever see those movies maybe where a guy has like a remote and he can pause time, do something while it's paused, rewind, and pick it back up. That sounds great, right? It sounds awesome. But that's not reality. Reality is time is flowing and it is finite. And because it's finite, I can't do all these things at the same time. And of course, other people's time is finite too. So if I want, I don't know, somebody to come to my house and repair my gutters because the gutters are broken, I have to have the freedom of time to do that. But so does that person, right? They can't go to my house and somebody else's house at the same time. So we have to coordinate those schedules to make that happen. And that means he's giving up something and I'm giving up something to make that happen. That is the definitional problem of life, is we can't do it all. We can't do it all. We are forced into these choices. And economics, as we discussed earlier in the week, is the science of studying choice. It's why do we choose and how do we choose? And we'll get to that as well in a minute. Just going to check the live stream, make sure there's no chats I need to worry about. No, there's not. Okay. I'm getting a headache, I'm noticing. Oof. Too much talking. Brain too big. Okay. Let's talk about what are the resources then. Okay. Maybe just stop looking at that screen and start looking at the screen because my eyes are hurting staring at the small screen, I guess. So there are four basic resources. We call them factors of production. They are land, which is natural resources, labor, which is the time of workers, capital, goods, and human capital. These are the same. These are capital, so it's the third one. It's capital, and there are two versions of capital. We'll come back to that. And the last one I'm going to talk about first, actually, is entrepreneurship. And if you were in class today, we got this far, and I started talking about the individual resources, but I never got to entrepreneurship. I'm going to start with that today. Entrepreneurship is a unique skill. It's the skill of managing the other resources to create useful goods and services for people. It's the risk taking of the production process. What do I mean by that? Okay. Let's say I was going to open a business. Let's say I had in my mind open a business. Let's say I want to open a food business, a restaurant, an eatery of some kind. I don't really have myself married to a particular concept, but I do want to do that. Okay. What business do I want to open? What kind of food do I want to serve? What is the atmosphere I want to do? Is it going to be casual, formal, fine dining, Americana, Italian, Chinese, Thai, Greek? What am I going to do? How much am I going to charge? Where am I going to put it? These are all decisions that we make, and I'm evaluating the other things, natural resources, labor, capitals, and trying to figure out. You're back. All right, well, you're not on camera, but you're on audio. So keep that in mind. All right, we're live. All right, I'm going to stay here and talk if that's all right. The stuff on the board is the stuff I'm streaming other than my fat head, okay? So we're good otherwise? How are we doing? Anybody? I'm fading.
I wish I could come in the morning, but your work husband has me held hostage.
I can neither confirm nor deny the nature of that relationship. All right, so back to what we were. So those watching from home, if my eyes wander that way, because I'm staring at the children that have walked in, who have kindly chosen to join me and stop me from falling asleep, which almost happened during the AP World side of this. Okay, so entrepreneurship is the skill of arranging the other resources in a useful way to accomplish the creation of a good or a service others might want. It is the let's call it the individual, but it doesn't have to be an individual. It is the individual responsible for the creation of a business. So many businesses, probably most businesses, fail. They don't succeed. So if I was going to open a restaurant in, I don't know, Shoreham Wading River, I have to evaluate some things. For example, I would not leap to pizza as the first thing I would open. Now, why is that? It's not that I don't think I can make good pizza. It's that there's like 15 pizza restaurants in a population town that only needs two. I'm exaggerating, obviously, but I hear about it all the time. Pazzo, well, I guess we had Pazzo, Bistro, Pellegrino, Wading River Pizza, the one that's down like more like Ridge, but the Pizza Crust, I think it's called. If they're still there, I don't even know. You got what's the Alfredo's? You got all these places around, and they're not all the same. A place like Alfredo's is probably meaningfully different from a place like Waiting River Pizza, which Waiting River Pizza is more like a real pizzeria and kind of it. Pellegrino's is more like a real pizzeria and kind of it. But you have like Bistro and you have Alfredo's, and they have like almost a section that could be restaurant. And Alfredo's is probably more restaurant than even La Bistro is. Um, and so these are things that exist. There is a Mexican joint in town. It seems to be relatively popular. There is Chinese food in town. It seems to be relatively popular. Then if you go to Rocky Point, there's a kind of old Chinese restaurant there that's pretty popular. So my point is that if you're going to open a food service thing in this region, I need to think about who my competition is going to be. And I also need to think about like, can I bring in competent staff? Right? Do I have the human capital, the skills to cook this food? Y'all don't need to write this down. You're going to get a printout of something like this when we start the school year. If it, write it if it helps you. Don't feel like you have to write it. Um, but can I bring in competent staff? In other words, I don't need Italians to cook Italian food. I need competent cooks to cook Italian food. What's going to make my food different than the people next to me? Should I go for something else? Like, there's no German food in town that I noticed. Should I go for German food? I don't know. I got to compete with the German restaurants in Stony Brook, and Schnitzel's is a really good restaurant. Can I compete with that in a place like Wading River or Shoreham? Is there a desire? Is there a market for that? And the answer is I may not know until I try. You know, um, it wasn't so obvious that Starbucks would be a good fit for Shoreham Wading River. That was McDonald's for ages. But it turned out the town's decision to never allow a drive-through in Wading River for one reason or another caused McDonald's to go out of business because of COVID. That McDonald's was doing just fine for many, 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 many years. And then when you make it so people can no longer access a drive-through, it became a thing where the McDonald's could no longer service food. And if I'm ordering food to my house via DoorDash anyway, is McDonald's really the one I'm going to DoorDash? Probably not. I'm probably going to DoorDash some other eatery. And that became the problem. And McDonald's went out of business as a result of this. So that's an example, really. The decisions made by the person who was the entrepreneur wasn't really the issue. The owners of the business didn't really do anything wrong there. It was town ordinances that hadn't mattered a great deal up to that point that suddenly societal collapse ended up meaning that this didn't work anymore. So that's the example of the entrepreneurship thing. Now, entrepreneurship is not really measurable. You measure it in the success of the business, right? So um, I'm thinking of some examples you might know. Amazon's a good example. So most people don't know this, but Amazon began as a one product store. Amazon began as an online bookseller. That was all it sold was books. Not even Kindle stuff. That didn't exist yet. Physical books. And people thought there's no way this concept is going to work because people felt like the people buying a book who went to a Walden Books or a Barnes and Nobles were the kind of people who would go in, hold the book, see the book, read the summary, page through the book. That this was sort of like a nirvana process where they had to be that kind of person. The kind of person who would sit and like these places had areas to sit and relax and just preview the book for a time and read it. Um, and Amazon, my memory might be a little fuzzy, did not make a great deal of money. It may have never made a profit under that model. But what was Jeff Bezos really doing? Well, if you look at the 1994 Jeff Bezos, this is not the Lex Luthor like figure you see now. It was a dopey little dude driving a Honda, I think it was a Civic, and his Amazon office was above a Chinese restaurant in Seattle, like literally the second floor of a Chinese restaurant. And he had no official signage. They had a banner they had spray painted the word Amazon on. And this is back in 1994. I was 13, 14 years old. And he was interviewed because what he was doing was unique and revolutionary. And people were asking him questions like, do you really think people want to buy books this way? And what he understood was it wasn't even the books he was selling. He was selling the concept of would people shop with confidence online, spend their money in an invisible format where you don't know who's got your information, what they're doing with it, and so on. Because it was a trust issue. I'll give you another example of something similar that failed miserably. So back when the internet was young, and I was there. I was there in the beginning, Frodo. Back when the internet was young, people didn't know what to make of it, but they knew what it could be. Like everybody could see like the potential of a website, a place where you could reach anybody. And so what people began to really focus on was domain names. Now, you might even know what the hell a domain name is. But for example, Amazon.com is a domain name. Google is a domain name. So in those days, people assumed you needed to be the person who owned the names of things that were synonymous with the thing you wanted to do. What do I mean by that? Okay, Mark Cuban famously got rich or made his first big money doing nothing other than owning the domain name buy.com and then selling it to somebody else. Because somebody else thought that if people were going to go to the internet to buy something, where would they go if not buy.com? BUY.com. How many things have you bought from buy.com? Shall I go to buy.com? Let's go to buy.com. Oh, God help me, what's going to come up here? Buy.com. Okay. Here we are. It's now called Rakuten, whatever the heck that is. I've heard of this actually. But it's another scheme, right? It's another scheme. It's just another scheme for selling crap. That's all it is. It's some sort of rewards program. It's not buy.com. No one goes there to buy anything. It's not ever what people thought it was going to be. You take it for granted that Google is a search engine for information on the internet. In fact, it's so synonymous with that, it's become the verb. You Google things. It's like Band-Aid. Band-Aid is not a noun in the way you think it is. You're not wearing a Band-Aid. It's a bandage. The brand name is Band-Aid. A search engine is what Google is. If it's become synonymous with, Google it literally means go find an internet search engine of any kind you want. It doesn't have to be Google. It could be Firefox. It could be Internet Explorer. It could be anything else. And search it out. That's what we're talking about, right? So these are all examples of this, right? All examples of this kind of stuff. So how do you phrase this? If you're looking for the best combination of these things, it's not always obvious what's going to be a good combination, what's going to work, what's not going to work. So we can't evaluate entrepreneurial skill other than by seeing if it worked or not. Amazon clearly worked because they got away from books and now they sell everything, right? And who would think you go to Amazon.com to buy stuff? Like nothing about that is intuitive or makes any sense, right? Shopping.com probably would have made more sense, and yet I don't think it's anything. It's just like buy.com. So these are your resources, right? Land, natural resources, labor, which is the time of your workers, capital goods, which is the tools you use to make other things, and then human capital, which is the skill set that workers have and their experience. And you wrap them all together, the entrepreneur puts them together and tries to create products, goods, and services for that. However, how do you do that? How do you make trade-offs, right? Because every time we make a decision, we exchange one possible outcome for another. That's your trade-off. So if I choose to make pizza, I've chosen to not make Thai. If I've chosen to make Thai, I've chosen to not make German food. If I chose to serve burgers, I'm choosing to not serve chili, whatever it is. Every time I make a decision to choose one possibility, I am foregoing the other possibility. That is a trade-off. How do societies decide these things? Because now we're getting to the big picture here. For societies to decide what stuff it's going to make, we have to answer questions. Now, we can answer these questions as individuals, or these questions can be answered for us by society itself. Maybe the leadership or whatever. And we'll talk about that because those are different economic systems. But let's talk about the questions we have to answer first. The first question is, we have all these resources. I want you to imagine the four resources we discussed: land, labor, capital goods, human capital, and you're the entrepreneur. We have them in a pile. There they are, boom, big pile of crap. There it is. First question, what are you going to produce? That's a good question. Just like saying pizza or Thai, what are you going to produce? Now, let's say I make a decision that we're going to make desks, okay? We're going to make desks or tables or desks or whatever. Let's do it desks. We're going to make desks. Okay, great. Question one is answered. Question two, how are we going to make the desks? Now, I can make this answer as simple as handmade or mass-produced. You can make a handmade desk, right? You can. Guys do it. They charge a lot of money for it. So I'll give an example. My uncle, this is true, has in his will left me his coffee table. What the hell I want a coffee table for? But for him, he wants to, Jason, this is for you. And he's leaving me in his will written out a coffee table. That's what I get. Okay. Now, he's had this coffee table for many, 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 many years. And as coffee table goes, I suppose it's nice. It's like, I wish I had a picture of it handy. It's two pieces of lumber that were naturally from a tree, and they have a natural, like, live edge look to them. It's actually one of those things where the fashions come back around, right? Because nowadays people make these live edge tables all the time. So that's what it looks like. There's no resin or anything like that. It's just two tables. They're joined together by these butterfly joins. He's had it for ages. My plan is that when he finally goes and I inherit the table, I don't want a coffee table. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go find an expert woodworker, somebody who knows what the hell they're doing, and I'm going to have them change this coffee table into a dining table by having them make it squared off correctly, and in the gaps put that resin, those colored resins that are very popular nowadays. I think that'd be cool. It'd be a nice tribute to my uncle. I'm here for it. I think it's a cool idea. I haven't told him that. He'd curse me from the grave if I heard his coffee table. But that's what I'm going to do. He's not going to have a choice. That's a kind of table. I'm going to pay a lot of money to do that. I think a tribute to my uncle is worth it, but it's probably like 10 grand to have someone make me this table. I could go to IKEA and get a table. Cost me $200. One's mass produced and you assemble it at home. The other one requires an expert level skill with very specialized machinery and processes. How you're going to produce something is very different. So if I'm going to make a desk and I'm going to make it mass produced, I have to think about what's the process for mass producing the desk. What tools do I need? How do I ensure every desk is identical? How do I make interchangeable parts, right? Because I have to make sure every screw in the desk is the same screw in every desk, because every desk is being made the same way. I don't want to make 20,000 different screws. I want 20,000 of the same screw. And this is all part of how I'm going to produce it. And then the last question might be the most important. Who is going to benefit from this? Who are you producing the desk for? So you've all been in class, and some poor schmucks are sitting in class right now. What is the student desk experience like? Well, if Dante created another layer of hell, it might be the student desk. Let's think about it. It is purposely made uncomfortable. All right. If you're sitting in a desk, or remember the desk you're sitting in, you will understand what I'm about to go through. It's purposely made to be uncomfortable. Why? If it was, well, it's not uncomfortable, but it's not too comfortable. You can imagine sitting in it for an hour. You could not imagine sitting in it for 8 hours. Why is that? We don't want you falling asleep. So the desk is made to allow for good posture, but not comfort. It's not a comfortable desk. The tabletop is flat. Maybe the very slightest angle in your direction, but it's flat and it is rectangular. Okay? In addition, they've probably cut a little groove in the very top of the desk. What is this for? This is to stop your pencil or pen from rolling on the desk. You have a place to put it. Okay? Despite the fact that the pencils have already beat you to it, they're not round. Right? Pencils are octagonal. I think there's 8 sides to them. So they'll sit flat on pretty much anything unless it's a pretty big slope. So there's no worry there. They're not round. They're not going to roll. And most pens aren't round exactly either, and their caps have some sort of way to stop rolling, whether it's the tab or the pocket holder or whatever might be on the pen. So actually, it might not even serve a purpose. Some desks have a little basket under them, which indicates there might be a need to store stuff there, but you probably have never used it ever. So therefore, most of the desks don't have that. If you're a lefty, get wrecked, schmuck, because the desk is made for righties. The intent of the desk is that a righty has the ability to lean to the right. There's even a bit of a support for your leg or your hip there in the form of a bar. So you can't just slip out of the desk as you lean to the right. If you're a lefty and you're leaning to the left, you're on your own. And if you're in one of those temporary folding desks that have like half a desk, the desk is always on the right-hand side. So it has a spot for your elbow to rest if you're a righty, and has nothing but the abyss for your left elbow if you're a lefty. So it's not made for you, lefty. The world discriminates against you. Get used to that. They're like these desks because the makers understand that schools are going to want to have the ability to move them around, either configure them in a class for group work or bring them down to a gym for a big testing session. They have to be this way. So that's your experience in a desk. The teacher desk is quite different. I have a heavy monstrosity that's quite difficult to move on your own. It has large drawers. I even have a lock on 2 of them. I don't have the key, but I have a lock. I don't know what the keys are. Why lock it? Well, there's a thought, I guess, that I might one day need to put something in here that requires being locked up. I don't know if it's student tests, something confidential, my lunch, money, I don't know, but I have the ability to secure something with a lock. Also, I have 4 drawers in the first place, clearly indicating I intend to kind of camp here and put things here on a more permanent basis than a student ever would. I have a very large slab desk here. I don't need a large slab on the top. But why give me a large slab? Well, it turns out I made the best use of it. I currently have my laptop right here I'm staring at. I have a 32-inch TV serving as a backup monitor. I have a couple of doohickeys and remotes and this and that. And my wallet's over here and the coffee's over there. And for whatever reason, my electric screwdriver is over here too. And I got my phone charging there. And I have my 8-way USB switcher thing over here. And on and on and on it goes. I got a tea maker back here. Here it is. Why do I need all this space? Well, clearly they intend for me to kind of live here for the entirety of the school year. Like, this is clearly intended to be like my home base. This is where I will be. This is where you'll find me. One day you'll take me away when I die here, right? This is where it's going to happen. This is Malvagno's spot. And every teacher has something like this somewhere. Maybe it's not quite like this, but something like this. And every teacher you've ever had has had some desk kind of like this somewhere. This is a different kind of thing. You're producing for a different person. The principal has a different desk for sure than I do. Although the functions may look kind of similar, it's probably much more fancy. Now, why is that? I can think of a very strong reason just in the fact that the principal is more likely to have a member of the public in his room. And the desk needs to look somewhat professional. The room needs to look somewhat professional. There probably needs to be decor befitting the leader of a building, not just the here's a desk, man, like every other teacher has. It would look a little weird if a principal had the teacher desk in his room. So these things all really matter. The functions are different. And so that will mean that the answers to the questions will change based on all this stuff. Now, next bit. Where are we? 38. I'm going to go for 10 more minutes or so and then probably wrap, closing thoughts. When you make these trade-offs, when you make a choice for one over the other, you are you're accepting those trade-offs. The trade-off has a cost. Now, I want to be very, very clear about what I mean by cost. There are two broad types of costs in economics: explicit and implicit costs. Explicit cost is price. In other words, you bought a bottle of water, cost you $1. That's explicit cost. It costs an explicit amount of money to acquire this item. But there's another cost to buying the water. That cost is implicit. It's not clearly stated on the water or in the water's price tag, but rather it's understood in a more abstract way. It's implied, hence implicit cost. And that implication is an opportunity cost, which is you bought a water for $1. What else did it cost you? It cost you anything else that the dollar could have bought that would have also served the function of the water. So I'll give you an example. Right now I have a slight headache, probably from talking too much. I haven't eaten all day. And I am hungry, I am tired, and I'm getting a little bit hangry. In 20 minutes, I end my stream here. Then I have to get in my car and hustle to Suffolk Community College, where I have to teach from 6 o'clock to 8:45 at night tonight. So I'm hoping to eat dinner somewhere in the 9:30 to 10 o'clock realm. So we're working on about a 24-hour fast here. And during that entire time, I'm having to do a lot of thinking. So my brain has no calories to burn right now. I'm actually running on literal empty. The decision to today buy a large coffee for $4, whatever it costs, we call it $3, whatever. That was the explicit cost. The implicit cost is for $4, I might have been able to buy a smaller coffee and some food. Even if it was just like a protein bar, something, snack, bag of nuts, whatever it is. Something that would have given me a little bit of calories for a little bit of brain power that might have kept me going through the end of the day. I didn't do that. So now I remain hungry, but I wanted the caffeine. See? So I went with the decision that what I needed was not food but caffeine. I needed liquid courage to keep me moving. That's what I needed. And so that's an explicit, or sorry, the implicit cost. I could have had something else for the same money. I chose to have this instead. I could eat a cheeseburger, but if I eat the cheeseburger, I don't get the hot dog. Well, you could buy a hot dog too. Yeah, but I spent $4, right? So the choice to spend $4 on the burger means I am losing all the joy, utility we call that, we would have gotten from the hot dog. And by the way, it would not have been the same. So let's say I go with that assumption. What if I say, oh, buy the hamburger and the hot dog? I'll prove it to you. When I finally do eat tonight, whatever I eat, the first bite is the best bite. Of whatever it is, it's the best bite. So if I buy pizza, the first bite of pizza will be the best bite of pizza. It will taste the best. It will be the most fulfilling. I will have maximum utility from it. And every bite after that will have diminishing returns. The reason is very simple. If you've ever worked out in your life and you have that drink of water after a large, hard workout, a big sweat, you ran, whatever, that first drink of water is truly pure heaven. It really is 10 out of 10, great, satisfying utility. If you continue to drink water and do not stop, there will come a point where you get actually nauseous from the water, you get sick from the water, you cannot imagine having another sip of water, and if you continue on this route, you will vomit it up. Same is true of food. The first bite of the meal is probably the most satisfying. The last bite of the meal you may not even be able to take because you're full. There's diminishing returns. So if I buy a cheeseburger and a hot dog and I eat the cheeseburger first, the hot dog will never be as good as it would have been had I bought the hot dog and ate that first. I am losing something. There is no such thing as, well, get both. No, 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 no. You are losing something. There is going to be an opportunity cost. The joy of the first bite of a hamburger is not the same joy as the first bite of a cheeseburger. It's not the same joy as the first bite of a hot dog, a chicken sandwich, a chicken nugget, a salad, whatever the hell you want to call it. So that's where opportunity cost comes in. So this is really important because it means things like really simple. You're taking macroeconomics or you're watching this and you're a glutton for punishment. What are you not taking instead? There's going to be benefits to not taking the other thing. Whatever the other thing is or things are, there's going to be benefits. You're losing them. Those benefits are not coming back. And this is critical because this is actually, as we'll discuss when we get into the actual proper course, evaluating opportunity cost is the correct way to evaluate a choice. Really it is. I'll give you an example of this. You're all going to be picking a college probably. You might have been told by somebody a good way to evaluate what college you want is to do the pros and do the cons of every college and evaluate it that way. This is a terrible strategy. Do not do that. That will yield you a bad result. How do I know it yields a bad result? Because half of all students never finish college, and a great many students change majors, and a great many students it's not going to work out. Well, it might work out, but it's not going to be optimal. Here's the way you pick a college. You three ready? Here's how you pick a college. When you're evaluating a college, make a list of the pros of going to that college. And by pros, I mean the utility, the benefits gained from attending the college. Okay? Unique benefits. Do that for every college. Make no list of cons. Don't worry about the cons, only the benefits. Then, put the lists on a piece of paper, each individually, and look at each list. Ask yourself, which collection of benefits can I not allow myself to pass up on? That's the school you go to. That's choosing based on the lowest cost. Because you're saying to yourself, I cannot afford to miss these benefits. They're too good for me to pass on them. So I must do them. That's super different than looking at the cons versus the pros. Because one thing you're going to find, we'll explore this on Friday, is humans are actually terrible at evaluating things like what's good for them, what's not good for them, what's a benefit, what's not a benefit. They're terrible at it. If people were good at this, we'd have no overweight people. If people were good at this, we'd have no habits on cigarettes or drugs or gambling. It wouldn't happen. There are very few people out there who think a gambling addiction is good. They don't think that, right? So why do they do it? They do it because they're addicted. Well, how'd they get addicted? Why would they start doing drugs? They didn't. These are not often rational decisions where they go, yeah, this is good for me. It's probably more like I could do this and still do other things, and it doesn't work out that way. So that my point is that when you look at something in a pro-con environment, you're going to end up making wrong decisions or decisions that are not the most efficient decisions. So something like this, right? I want to go to a private school. I want this, make up a school in your head. I want to go to NYU. It's my dream school, blah, blah, blah. I want to go. Okay. What are the benefits of NYU? I got to go to my dream school. Okay, why was it the dream school? What are the benefits that are there? What if the dreams are nightmares? What if what you think is great about it, you get there and find out, actually, I don't love it? What if you're certain about something right now and you later learn that you're not certain? And by the way, it happens in every single walk of life you've ever been in. You could be certain that dating so-and-so will make you happy, and 6 months in, you're miserable and hate each other. What changed? Nothing. You were wrong. You didn't have a full picture. And that's why it's always very difficult to be like, I know what's good for me. I know what's bad for me. I want those things. No, don't do pro-con. Do benefits. what are the benefits if I go here and the benefits if I go there. And you might still make a wrong decision, but you're probably going to make a right decision because odds are good some of those benefits are accurate. They will materialize and you'll get them. And this creates all kinds of weird environments for us too, because go buy a TV, right? When you buy a TV, go to Best Buy, go to Target, go wherever. What do you see? The wall of TVs, right? TV 1, TV 2, TV 3, TV 4, 5, 15,000 TVs. And you're staring at them. And you're staring at them. And you can tell, man, the picture on that TV is sharper than the picture on that TV. And this TV is $300 more than that TV. I don't know. Should I buy this TV? I don't know. This TV is only $200 more than that TV. Is the picture as good as this picture? And you're doing this. You're mentally and physically doing this. And then you decide on the TV and you take it home. And what happens? It turns out the comparison you made at the store can no longer be made at home. Those other TVs aren't there. You didn't plug it in next to your old TV and go, is this actually better? You just plugged in the new TV. And now you're sitting there having bought a TV based off a comparison you will never get the opportunity to make again because you're never going to stand next to another TV ever in your life. So what good was that as a methodology of choosing? What good was this method? It informs you nothing. It has nothing to do with the way you're going to see the TV. Also, the lighting in the store is totally different. Also, the angles you're viewing it at home is totally different. Also, where the sun reflects out of the window is totally. These things don't have anything to do with your home experience. And yet we make decisions based on them. And it seems like a very logical way to make a decision. Compare this to that, except when it's not valuable at all, which is quite often. Colleges are just like that. You will not have any idea if you'd be happier at the college you didn't pick because you didn't pick it. The comparison's not there anymore. You are where you are, and you're doing the thing you're doing, and there's no guarantee other colleges better or worse would have been exactly the same outcomes. So this is what I mean by opportunity cost. It's very difficult to look at the foregone benefits and really evaluate that way because sometimes we don't even know what those benefits would actually be. Nevertheless, though, it is the best model we have for choosing. Look at the pros and pick the list you can't afford to give away. Minimize your costs. All right? Now, 10 minutes left. And that's the end of these notes. All right, so let's wrap. So we have 4 resources: land, labor, capital, goods, human capital, and we have a 5th resource in the form of entrepreneurship that we kind of are going to set aside because it's very difficult to measure and quantify. We're going to focus on the other 4. You combine these resources in order to create goods and services that you are making for people. To create goods and services, we need to figure out what to make. In order to do that, we have 3 essential questions because our resources are scarce. If I use resources to make one thing, I cannot use those resources to make another thing. They are consumed, right? So what are we producing? How are we producing it? And for whom are we producing these things? Will be questions that we as a society, not just individuals, will need to answer if we are going to figure out how to most efficiently allocate our resources. So if I want to decide something like who should get medical treatment at a hospital emergency room, I have to ask myself, well, what am I providing? I'm providing emergency medical care. Okay, who am I providing it for? Whoever the hell walks in the door. All right, how am I providing it? By utilizing the best I can in modern technology. For whom are we going to have this emergency medical care benefit? And that will cause me to triage the people who come in. Because if I say it's emergency medical care, your headache is not emergency requiring emergency medical care. And your problem will be prioritized very low. The person who comes in losing a gallon of blood every 30 seconds is emergency medical care and needs immediate attention and will be prioritized above you. That's a way in which we answer these questions. We triage it out. Who gets my care? Who is going to benefit from this service now, first, immediately? And by the way, if the person with the headache wants immediate medical care, they can get it. The secret is the system will have to decide how they get it. Do they steal it? Do they acquire it by simply being willing to pay more for it than anybody else, and they go to a private facility? How are they going to acquire that medical care? It's totally up to them. And the system will determine what they can and can't do to figure out how they get that care. All right. Any choice you make has a trade-off. Those trade-offs will require you to take option A over option B, or option B over option A. And whatever you give up will have had benefits you don't get. A turkey sandwich is different than a ham sandwich. And as a result, if you get the turkey, you lose the benefits of having the ham. And these foregone benefits are called opportunity cost. They're different from explicit cost. It's not a price. It's rather the benefits you could have had instead. If we arrange our decision making by trying to minimize our opportunity costs, we will most likely maximize our benefits and make, on the whole, better, more efficient decisions. All right, we're going to stop there. All right, I have many miles to walk before I sleep. Those who tuned in, thank you. I appreciate your time. You were a great audience of silent viewers. I didn't even check the chat to see if anybody chatted. I hope not. They did. It was retracted, and then Amazon started when SSL was made. I don't know what that means, but I believe you. All right, we're out. Have a good one, guys. That is 1 hour, 59 minutes, and 27 seconds of stream done today. And I'm signing off later.